legendary investor, right? The Oracle of Omaha and so on. So he once decided to invest in a company after reviewing their financial statements for just 5 minutes. He looked at it for 5 minutes. He said, make an investment. So his company made an investment there, and it turned out to be a fabulous investment, gave them great returns. So somebody asked him, I mean, how could you decide to make a big investment in just 5 minutes? So the answer that he gave, it can be etched in gold. He said it was 50 years of experience and 5 minutes of decision time, right? 50 years of experience and 5 minutes of decision time. So what you're getting paid for is that 50 years, right? The time that you spend on something might be just 2 minutes, right? Like I said, I mean, a PhD thesis of 39 pages. You're not getting, a PhD for 39 pages. I mean, nobody can come and ask you that, have you taken, 3 months to write 1 page? Right? It's a very silly question, right? So you get paid for all that background that you've created, right? Now, coming to, how intellectual property today is becoming the biggest asset. If you look at India versus Germany, Japan, around 1945-47, pretty much, Germany was devastated. Japan was to some extent as well. India was in a very bad shape, just had gotten independent. We had famines just before that and so on. But you look at the growth paths of these countries. I mean, Germany, Japan, they rebuilt themselves so fast. Why couldn't India do it? The answer, I think, is the IP, right? So Germany, Japan, these countries, they lost their physical assets. Their factories were bombed, their roads were bombed, etc. They have physical assets, but they retained these assets because they had a very highly educated population. They had a very highly skilled population. In India, do you know what was the literacy rate at the time of independence, 1947? Any guesses? 14%, very close. 14%, only 14% of Indians knew to write their names. I mean, you know what's the definition of literacy in India, right? If you can write your name, you are literate, right? So only 14% of Indians knew to write their names. So we were devastated in this asset, in IP, we were devastated. Other countries were devastated in other assets, but because this was intact, they could build it up. So now, one great asset that you get paid for, of course, is your intellectual property. The other thing, as my boss always used to say, is, it's where I keep my phone. It's your address book, right? So the address book that you have in your phone, which basically signifies the network that you have, is another great asset for you. And why is that so? Now, Carl Friedrich Gauss, all of you know, the great mathematician. So he lived from 1777 to 1855. Do you know what was really special about him? He is said to have been the last mathematician who knew all the maths of his time. All the maths that was discovered, created, whatever you call it, in his time that was prevalent, he knew everything, right? So that's what is generally said of him. Now, so nobody else after him can lay claim to know the whole of maths. And likewise, in all fields of study, I mean, can anybody say that he knows everything about computer science, everything about automobile engineering? It's not possible, right? So that's where your address book becomes very important. You need to have contacts. You need to be able to reach out to people who know things that you don't know. So if I have a query in some industry that I haven't worked in before, I know whom to reach out, right? And that is a big, big asset. I mean, you guys will realize it, once you get into your careers and so on. So the people who are sitting around you, your batchmates, your classmates, I mean, the kind of network that you grow through them is going to become very, very valuable, right? So, I mean, I'll give you, just as an aside, I mean, I'll give you a funny anecdote. So, one of my batchmates was in an automobile company in India, and I wanted to purchase a car, and I wanted it very quickly, right? So now, this particular model of car which I liked, a lot of people liked it, so there was a 3-month waiting line for it, right? So, I mean, I just called my friend and I said, yeah, can you, get this across to me? Can you move my case a bit? So he said, yeah, sure. I mean, I'll tell you which color, which is not so much in demand. If you agree to that color, I'll get it to you tomorrow. I said, fine, great. I'm not very particular about color, fine. So he got it to me the next day. Now that's the power of my network. Now I was talking to a business promoter in India who, as typical of some of the business families, he hadn't had much of education. So he was pulled out of class 12 or whatever, graduation to start working on the family business and take that up. So he was telling me that, okay, you guys, you're from IITs, you're from IIMs, you have a great network. So when you need things done, you use your network, right? I haven't gone to the institutes like that you guys have gone to. I started off on my business very early. So what do I use? I don't have a network to use. What do I use? Money, right? So it's a funny anecdote. So he says, you guys have the network, you use it to get things done. I use money to get things done. So why do you feel very self-righteous about it and feels very self-righteous about using the network? So it was a point for me to ponder. Yeah, I use my network to get something done. Should I? Okay. Now, when we are talking about knowledge, I just told you about how you get paid for your knowledge, for your IP. Another thing another perspective that I want to share with you is knowledge also gives you tremendous speed. Many people don't realize this correlation between knowledge and speed. I'll tell you how it works. Knowledge gives you tremendous speed. Okay, now coming to speed first. So all of you know who were the first people to climb Mount Everest, right? Okay. Does anybody know who were the second? Who was the first cardiologist to do a heart transplant? Dr. Christian Barnard in South Africa. Does anybody know who was the second? So that's called the first mover advantage, right? Speed is the key. Whoever gets there first, he is known, right? Beyond that, it's a crowd, right? So now that is the importance of speed in entrepreneurship, in launching new products, in getting into an area that other people have not spotted. Speed is key, right? In the market, speed is key. Now, how does knowledge give you speed though, right? I'll tell you from my experience, knowledge gives you perspective, right? So if tomorrow I get a proposal, a client approaches me and asks me to submit a proposal in, let's say, agribusiness, right? Now, if I know something about agribusiness, if I have a perspective of it, I can turn around the proposal in one day. If I don't know about it, if I have to go back and start researching things from there on, it's going to take me 15 days, right? So collecting knowledge proactively, building a knowledge base, it makes you do things quickly. I'm coming back to the Warren Buffett example. He decided in 5 minutes to invest in a company, a very successful investment. Why? Because he had 50 years of knowledge. He knew that industry very well. He knew what works there, what doesn't. He liked the management team. He decided to invest, right? So knowledge proactively gives you that great advantage of time as well. Many people don't realize this. So it's very important to proactively keep building up knowledge, right? So whether or not I have a requirement to do something in agribusiness tomorrow, if I proactively build it up, when such a situation comes, I can deliver things fast, right? So that proactivity is very important, and that's a problem with all of us in the IIT system. Most of us are reactive. I mean, this is the syllabus, this is the day when the exam is happening. On that, N-2, I'm going to start studying. This is my coursework, this is what I'm going to study, and this is what I'm going to do, right? So a stitch in time saves 9, popular saying that all of you know, basically to encourage proactivity. Likewise, I would say a perspective in time. If you have it with you beforehand, if you have a point of view on things, working on them is going to get very easy. You're going to be able to do things very quickly. Right? Proactivity, therefore, I believe, is the key to time management. So if you want to turn around things fast, you have to build a knowledge base proactively. Right? More of proactivity and what it means, we'll come to that later. But one question here, that when we talk of time management, how many of you maintain a diary? Do you know where you're spending your time each day? Does anybody here maintain a diary? At the end of the day, you write down, this is what I did today. This is what I didn't do. Hardly. So, I mean, I think you're Generation Y. So, in our time, some of us used to maintain diaries and so on. I used to at a certain point of time in my life, which really helped me. Of course, now I don't, because now I think I'm managing things okay, but at a certain point of time I did, because unless you measure and monitor what you're doing, you never realize how much time you're spending on useless things, how much time you're spending on things that you shouldn't be doing. You never realize. Maintain a diary. It's a very, very healthy habit. Right? So have you guys come across this very famous paradigm on time management? Very, very famous, very powerful, very effective. Right? So this was popularized by Stephen Covey in his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, but I think it's a masterpiece. He said that I would classify my activities into the following buckets: urgent, not urgent, important, not important. That's the matrix, right? So now if you look at quadrant 4, things that are not urgent, not important, clearly, time wasters, trivia, right? A lot of us end up doing things in quadrant 4, right? And that's a red quadrant. That's something you should be, definitely it's a no-no, right? Quadrant 3, things which are urgent, you need to submit them tomorrow, day after, urgent things, but they're not really that important. So, interruptions. So people are not so important to you, but then you need to do something for them tomorrow. This is quadrant 3, right? Quadrant 1, which is where many of us unfortunately find ourselves, right, is doing things on an emergency basis when they're important things, but they've become urgent. So you've allowed things to become urgent. So if you had a task to complete on November 15th, you're going to start off on it only on November 10th. Then it's going to be in quadrant 1, right? So then you're going to be in crisis management, managing deadlines, looking at pending issues, right? Instead, what Stephen Covey said is progressively, it can't be done in a day, progressively, slowly, shift yourself to quadrant 2. Do things which are important but not urgent. Read the newspaper. If I don't read the newspaper, it doesn't affect me tomorrow. It's not an urgent thing that I'm doing because I have something tomorrow, right? But if I don't read the newspaper, over a long run, it's going to badly affect me. I mean, I'm not going to be updated with what's happening in industry, not going to know what's happening in policy, right? I mean, that's unsustainable. So long-term activities being done proactively, he says if you focus your time there, then you'll find that you don't end up in crisis situations. Like I said, if you proactively studied something, if I proactively studied agribusiness, I won't end up in a crisis situation where somebody calls me and asks for a proposal in 2 days and then it's a crisis for me, right? Because I can manage it very well, right? So this is something that, I think everybody should reflect and try to move their lives towards doing things which are very important, right? Reading the newspaper, building general knowledge, very important. They won't affect you tomorrow. You won't lose anything tomorrow in your class because you haven't read the newspaper, but it will affect you in the long run, right? So I mean, if there's one thing where, I can, of my entire talk, something that you can start doing right from tomorrow, I think it's this. Start maintaining a diary and sort of classify your activities into which bucket they fall into. Try to move yourself towards quadrant 2, right? Okay. Okay, now the next thing about consulting is, I told you what a consultant gets paid for, the body of knowledge that he has proactively gained, and I said it's the entire knowledge that you get paid for, not just what you apply in a particular engagement you're doing, but the entire knowledge. Now, what are you trying to achieve as a consultant? You have to measure your impact. What is the impact that I have delivered? Now, many people send me their CVs, my juniors from the IIM and some of my other contacts, they send me their CVs, and their CVs typically read this way. They say, I led a process re-engineering exercise. Okay, so this is good, but I mean, tell me what's the impact? What did that achieve, right? So just, look at it, contrast the two. I led a process re-engineering exercise versus I re-engineered process of inventory and I delivered 20 crores of annual savings. This is solid impact, right? So I tell people that, even when you make your CVs, when you talk about what you've done focus on the impact. What is the output? What you have achieved, right? That's what the focus needs to be on. As a consultant, I mean, every engagement that I do, I have to be looking for impact. I can't say I formulated a strategy, I re-engineered a process. Okay, what's the impact of that, right? So consultant's role is to identify and diagnose what are the problems of the client. So for instance, this is a live case. So if a client has 500 products, he manufactures 500 products, he's overall losing money. Overall, he's making a loss. Now he doesn't know which of these products is making a profit and which one is making a loss. And it's a big task to figure that out, right? So that could be a problem that you need to identify and diagnose. So where are the problems? Because in big businesses, very often it's not easy to figure out where are the problems. It's like doing a diagnosis of a human body ailment. It's like that, right? So to do that, you need to analyze and formulate solutions, come out with recommendations, and very importantly, you have to communicate an acceptable solution, right? In fact, this I think is, again, towards the end of my presentation, I'm going to talk a bit about probably, differences between engineering and management, and, at a very high level, what kind of orientation one would have. You can look at the differences and figure out. But I think this is also one difference, that an engineer can come out with a very good solution, right? But somebody in management has to also communicate it. You have to convince people about the solution. That's another task in itself. Coming out with a logical solution is one task, but communicating it and convincing people about it is another one, right? So as I said, out of your total ken of knowledge and skills that you have, only a particular portion might be applied in a case. That's fine. So very often, therefore, what happens is that the conclusions that you come out with can be intuitive, right? So, I mean, I might have a intuition that there is a good market for tablets in India, right? But that's only a high level sort of intuition, which is a prima facie kind of thing. But if you need to really validate it through the rigor of analysis, through the rigor of a market study, it needs to be very authoritative, right? You need to come out with how much, what, quantify the numbers, right? So some of the kind of engagements that we do, for instance, is, if a company is looking to set up, let's say, a high-speed rail from here to the airport of the city, right? From city center to airport. Now that is something that will be tendered out. 10 companies will be applying for this. Now everyone has to decide how much will he bid for it, right? And how do you decide that? I mean, do you bid 500 crores for it, 600 crores? What do you bid for it? How do you decide that? It has to come through a very thorough, detailed market study. What are the kind of industries coming around? What kind of traffic can I have? What kind of tariff can I charge? How much will be my annual payout from it? And for that kind of payout, if I have a certain expectation of return and so on, then how much can I invest, right? So a lot of market analysis is needed before various big engineering jobs, right? Okay, now if you look at how technologies, industries, etc., how they evolve, technologies, industries, solutions in general, how they evolve, how they come down, generally they follow this kind of a pattern. So you enter the market where, as a consultant, typically one would go in with market entry kind of solution. So if let's say something that is very nascent, let's say, I don't know, market for microfluidics in India, right? So you enter that, you don't know really what's going to be the size of this market, what kind of offerings will work here, etc. So that's where you look at market entry, right? Preparing for growth. So here you look at, once you entered the market and sort of established yourself, you've maybe broken even, etc., then how do I grow? How do I go to the next level? So do I grow through franchisees? Do I grow through own operations, investments? Do I lease out facilities? How do I grow, right? So that is the growth phase and the growth strategy part of it. Continuing the growth story, now you've come to a stage where, yes, I have grown, I have become big. When you become big, naturally your efficiencies fall. is, a lot of bureaucracy comes in and processes get stretched to the kind of volumes that you're doing. So there is when you require a lot of efficiency to be improved in terms of operations. Once you've come to a higher plane in the evolution of the industry, there you are looking at consolidating the base that you have and coming out with how to improve performance. So this could be about making people perform better, aligning their objectives, individual objectives to the objectives of the organization, setting up your performance systems in the same way, etc. Right? And finally, evaluating what are the future options. So do you want to, when the industry after this phase, it sort of is not so hot anymore and comes down, then do you want to diversify into other things? Do you want to turn around? Now, this is something which is very, very commonly seen across industries. And let me tell you, most of the success stories of people who become entrepreneurs, made it really big, etc., it's the timing. I mean, they've gone in somewhere in the initial phases when the risk of going in is high. It's a toss-up. Will it work? Will it not work? You don't know. But then you've entered, you placed your bets, entered early, and because the industry took off, you've had phenomenal growth. So if someone were to ask me that if Bill Gates came into the arena today, and if he wants to set up an IT company and so on, will he achieve the same success as what Microsoft achieved? I guess not, right? So if you are entering the market today, then you have to look for something else. You can't do what Bill Gates did. Right? That's over. That era is over, right? So one of my bosses used to say that, the concept of the trinity of gods in the Hindu pantheon, right? So the creator, the preserver, and the destroyer, right? So he used to say that businesses and products are like that. You need to create, you need to have a roadmap to preserve and also to destroy, right? So if you are releasing a product, you need to know how to create the product, how to support the product for, let's say, 3 years, 4 years, whatever is your preservation timeline, and you need to know how to destroy it. And you need to know how to create the next release of the product. So he says the best companies which are most forward-looking, they are creating, preserving, and at the same time, they have another team which is working on the next version and how to destroy this one, right? So keep reinventing yourself. This is true of your personal lives as well. You have to keep creating, preserving, and destroying yourselves. You have to keep doing new things, right? Only then you will be in step with the market. Now, coming to how, one would, I talked about insight and analysis for consulting and so on. Coming to how you would do it, if you have information, just raw data which you process into information, that is still not adequate. You need to bring out insights from that. That's when you'll be able to recommend solutions to anybody, right? So just to give you an example, one data point that I'm giving you is that India's GDP grew steadily after independence in 1947, right? So we used to have famines before independence. We did away with it. We became food self-sufficient. We brought in TVs, telephones, computers. So one data point is that India's GDP has been growing. We've been improving. But let me give you some other data points here which put things in a different perspective. This is where analysis of data comes. So now if I just change the metric from India's GDP to India's share of world GDP, India's GDP divided by world GDP, in 1947 we were at around 5%, right? In 1991, we dropped to just 2%. So while our GDP might have been growing and we got TVs and telephones and everything, relative to the world, we were really falling behind, right? Not many people know this. Many of our politicians like to tell us that we are your Mai Baap, we brought television into India, we brought telephone into India, you should be grateful to us. But this is the real story. Just a change of the metric from India's GDP to share of world GDP, right? Another data point, from 1947 to 91, India's population nearly tripled. So here you have a situation where you have more people in the workforce and yet your GDP contribution falls by 60%, right? So what is the takeaway from that? On a per capita basis, how much did India's contribution to world GDP fall, right? 5% contributed by X people, just 2% contributed by 3X, right? So I mean, you can see that it was devastating. From 47 to 91 in terms of per capita contribution to world GDP, we might have fallen by, I don't know, 80 or 90%, right? So now this is going to be my analysis, and then I'm going to come to this conclusion of, what really was India's performance. So the point I'm making is that looking at data in one way and looking at it in another way to build perspectives, it can completely change the story. And this is what insight is all about. Looking at it in the right perspective and coming out with your conclusions, coming out with your recommendations and solutions, right? And the only way to develop that kind of, insight and insight further has to lead to decisions, right? So if you come out with an insight that, this is not working for me, then what's the decision? What will work for you, right? So in order to come out with decisions for your clients from the insights that you derive, you need a lot of maturity and wisdom. And this is going to come only through experience and exposure. Now, what's the difference between experience and exposure? Exposure, I would say, is breadth. Being able to have very diverse kind of exposure that gives you a breadth of things. Experience is having depth in something, doing a lot of it, right? So having that kind of experience gives you the depth, right? Both of these are essential if you need to finally take your insights into decisions, because this is what ultimately you're doing as a consultant. People are going to base their, investment decisions of thousands of crores of their shareholders' money based on what you tell them, based on what decisions you propose to them, what recommendations you give them. Right? So how do you gain this exposure? There's no other way to do it. Work on as many situations as you can. I mean, you guys, your students here doing your BTech, MTech, etc., try to gain as much exposure as you can. Work every vacation that you have, try to do a different kind of internship. It could be something as simple as, accounting for a factory, anything like that. It's okay, no issues. But every kind of exposure helps you learn, right? And that is something that, my generation, we probably didn't do very well. We, didn't, go in for internships during our vacations and so on. If you know someone in your family circles, in your friends circles who runs a factory, go work with him. Do it for gratis, whatever, but gain that exposure. Because exposure is what allows you to decide what you want to do later in life. Okay, and did you know something very interesting? This is from, research of psychology and neuroscience, that exposure and diversity actually increase your lifespan, right? Let me explain to you. So, I don't know if any of you have read this book, Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer. It's an extremely fascinating book. So Joshua Foer is a science reporter. Okay, he trained to be a science reporter, and he covered this event called the World Memory Championships. So he covered it as a reporter. He just went and interviewed people and looked at the event and so on. But one thing which really caught his attention was when he spoke to these people who were doing incredible feats of memory. I mean, memorizing 15 decks of cards, right? What is the sequence of them? Memorizing a binary string of 1,000 characters, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, reproducing it from memory. In half an hour's time, you memorize it and then come out with it. They were doing incredible feats of memory. But when he spoke to all of them said, we are not extraordinary people. We have the same kind of brain that you have, but it's just that we have learned certain techniques of how our brain works, and we are able to leverage that, we are able to utilize that to, really enhance our memory and participate in these events. So then Joshua Foer said, wow, if that's the case, why don't I try doing this myself? So he actually trained under some memory champs, and he contested the world championship the next year, and he won. Right? So he became the world memory champion, and he's written this book about his experience of doing that and his study of the human mind, how it works, what techniques work to memorize, etc. We've forgotten a lot of these things because today people don't believe in memorization. Schools have stopped teaching multiplication tables. You don't do anything in the head. I mean, I've seen kids in schools today take out their calculator for 5 into 0. Really, I mean, literally, this is an IB school. I have really seen this, okay? So IB is one of the very high-end curriculums, right? Okay, so some of